again, as I was saying before, stress is kind of a large label that we use to label a lot of different emotions and anxieties and so many different things. And I think it's fair to kind of allow us to kind of work within a specific scope, but at the same time, realizing that at the end of the day, what we feel about stress is what we feel about stress, and no amount of definition is really going to limit that. So WHO, which my husband was telling me, doesn't have such a great credit score right now, but we'll accept their definition. But their fancy definition of stress is the reaction people may have when presented with demands and pressures that are not matched to their knowledge and abilities and which challenge their ability to cope. So again, the reaction people may have when presented with demands and pressures that are not matched to their knowledge and abilities and which challenge their ability to cope. So quite a bit of words there, but I think there's a lot of keywords. So I just want to open it up to everybody else. Raise your hand or whatever. I think that's what we're doing, right, Malvika? Raising hands? All right. If you have any thoughts or anything that jumps out to you or pops out to you, stands out to you, pinpricks you, whatever you want to say, that from this definition that kind of shapes your own definition of stress.
I'll go. I think it's interesting that it says when presented with demands and pressures that are not matched to their knowledge and abilities, because I think there's a part of sort of feeling like, oh, I have to know everything, or I think there's also part of insecurity because I don't know anything. So it's interesting that it's kind of hinting to the fact that it's when your insecurities are triggered, or when you feel like you're in a vulnerable situation, or you feel like you're outside of your comfort zone, that's when you start to feel a bit stressed out, because you're like, how am I going to figure this out? It doesn't make any sense. So I thought that part of the definition was good, and it kind of spoke to other aspects that I was thinking about.
Fair enough. And that's a really nice nuance that you're picking up on is the insecurities and fears that lie underneath a lot of our stress, that on, say, a topical level, stress looks like, whatever it is, it's, not getting into the university I want to, or whatever it may be. It has that topical view, but below there's a lot of insecurities and fears that are feeding into it. Very, very nice. Shweta?
Hi. So when I read this, I actually thought that typically stress has a negative connotation, but when I read this, I felt like, oh, this could actually have a positive connotation, because inevitably we don't always have the knowledge and abilities that are needed. However, that's how we learn. So I think stress is a great motivator to learn, and I kind of viewed it in that light.
Very nice. You're pinpointing on a point that we're going to bring up later on, but yeah, stress can actually have a positive effect. But that mismatch of abilities, it kind of takes away from that. It's not that the stress is horrible and in it of itself has that value of being bad and evil, but rather there might just be a mismatch of what we're able to cope with or what our own abilities are that, like you said, it's an opportunity to grow and learn to be able to match that eventually. Very great. Very great. Very cool. Any other thoughts? You don't have to have thoughts right now, but if you have thoughts.
Yeah, when you started this, I was like, before she pulls up this definition, let me see what stress means to me.
Good.
What she says. So what I wrote was a reaction that comes up when something does not go my way or how I want it to go. And it almost, first of all, the fact that reaction was the same in both. And when presented with demands and pressures that are not matched with knowledge or ability. So that concept of mismatch, I want it to go this way, or this is what I know and this is what I can do, versus this is what is required of me, or this is what's actually happening. And then the mismatch between that and the reaction that comes out of that, I think is, it's interesting that even World Health Organization thinks along the same lines as Ananda Madhavadas. So
yeah, some people may not agree with WHO, but at least it makes sense. I'm not trying to diss WHO. My husband kept on telling me yesterday, he's like, do you really want to include that definition? It's not very positive. I'm like, it's all right, it makes sense. But I completely agree with you that one of the keywords that stuck out for me personally as well was the word reaction. And again, we'll talk about it in a few slides, but there is a large difference between reaction and responding. And I think a lot of that comes from, I mean, it's interesting that they've included that word, and I love semantics. I love, you know, using particular words to mean a specific thing. And I really appreciate that they said reacting, because reacting has more of a, it's more of a instant or innate reaction versus responding, which requires time and thought. I think I saw another hand up. Shruti, I think, had her hand up. Was I just mistaken?
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to say that I think stress, another reason why we get stressed is also because when we are presented in these certain situations where we don't know, or where, you know, we're not matched to our knowledge and abilities. So I think we're so scared of making mistakes, and we don't allow ourselves to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do make that, we're like wired to think that we're supposed to be perfect at everything that we do, and every situation that we're faced with. So yeah, I think that's another major reason.
It has nothing to do with our overbearing parents at all, right? Has nothing to do with our environment whatsoever. I'm just joking around, but yes, I completely agree. We're pre-wired, or, you know, taught in this time and age that, you know, perfection is all that is needed, and with it comes a whole lot of burden, right? A whole lot of burden of guilt, fear, stress, that can accumulate, and which is why stress is such a huge thing nowadays, right? We talk, especially in these troubling times, twice now, that what's it called? Stress is such a big, big word, and you know, we have to remove it, we have to get rid of it, we have to reduce it as much as possible. And there's some truth to it, but I think we can give stress, you know, a more benefit of doubt that, you know, it can be helpful in certain ways too. So these are all wonderful thoughts. I'm going to get going on the next part. And we're actually going to watch a small video. So like my bio said, I've been doing mindfulness while I'm on mat leave right now. Since, you know, taking care of a child is not enough, I thought I'd overwork myself, but I've been working on mindfulness, and it's come from a need for, you know, I work with children with autism, and I've been wanting to see how I can include, I guess, more mindful practices with them. So half the reason why I joined this course, but also, you know, using mindfulness as a technique myself. So this is actually one of the videos I had to watch for coursework. I'm not going to show the whole video because, one, it gives away part of the answer, and two, because I don't completely agree with it. So if you want, you can afterwards, you know, take your time to watch this video yourself and see what makes sense to you. But for the purposes of today's talk, I just thought the whole video doesn't make sense, but we'll go with it. Okay, so I apologize that I'm going to keep my hand over the
Stress is usually seen as something we need to avoid. This is not true. We need stress, and we need our body's stress hormone cortisol to rise and fall throughout the day. Stress helps us wake up in the morning, helps us focus, learn, and remember new things. It's when people experience too much stress and start having difficulties coping that stress becomes a problem. High levels of stress can disrupt the natural changes in the body's stress response system and start to affect our physical and mental health. Over time, accumulated stress can result in false FFF response activations. When trying to measure our stress tolerance, the bucket analogy can be helpful. Our stress tolerance, or the size of our bucket, is a product of our genes, personality, and life experiences, and its size varies from person to person. The water in this analogy is the combination of all the stress in your life. We use the coping strategies we have available to keep our bucket from overflowing. They are like taps that allow water to drain from the bucket. Stress can include training, work, school, relationships, finances, moving, changing jobs, or the loss of a loved one. Both positive and negative experiences will affect the water level. A big bucket can hold more water or stress before it overflows. With a smaller bucket, less water is required for the water or stress level to become critical.
That's about all I'm going to show. There might be some thoughts that come out of this video I'm going to ask you to either jot it down or hold it into your thoughts. I just want to talk a bit about it, and it'll kind of come all together with our discussion. So I don't want you to lose those thoughts that you have. So speaking about stress and watching this video, I think a few more key points kind of come out, and I'm going to highlight about 4 of them. In this section, I also am going to be taking some examples from Shastra. So if you're not feeling comfortable with that, no worries. I'll try to explain it as best as possible. But of course, at the end, we can kind of delve deeper into it. And then, of course, I'd like to hear from you, any examples that you have, any of your thoughts, as well as even your own experiences. I think this is what really helps to make stress, humanize it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that by the end of this kind of discussion here on this page, that I'd like to make stress a bit more of a nice partner to have. I mean, we're talking about coexisting with stress. So if it's this really ugly, huge, dark cloud in your life, I'd rather bring it and make it into something a bit nicer. So that's what I'm hoping that this kind of discussion will help. So this part, please, unmute yourself. Let's all discuss. And I'll try to time myself that we don't go over too much, because I think it's a really nice conversation. But first and foremost, I think one thing that the video highlights right in the beginning is that stress is needed. And I changed that word needed into inevitable, just because needed makes it sound that it's good to have stress in your life. And in one way it is, because on a physiological level, stress is needed. Whether it's to wake up in the morning, whether it's to kind of, if you didn't have stress in your life to get up in the morning and be on time at work, would you really wake up in the morning? Probably not, right? On a physiological level, it is needed in that. And I think a better word for needed is inevitable, right? It's going to happen in our lives, regardless of what we personally want to do. So once, having that thought in our mind that it's inevitable, it kind of starts to shrink stress from this ugly, dark tangle of, whatever, into something that's a bit more manageable. And that's kind of where we want to get to. And I was thinking of some, examples from Shastra and our movement. And I think the biggest one is Srila Prabhupada writing and publishing the Chaitanya Charitamrita in 2 months. I mean, stress was inevitable in that situation. All those devotees that were writing and publishing and painting and all that, it was required. And Prabhupada stressed that during that time, right? So I think that's, a practical example that we can think of. I can think of a couple more, but I'm going to open it up and maybe take like 1 or 2 examples that you can think of that kind of highlights that need for stress in one way without it kind of becoming too negative. Any thoughts, ideas? I can think of a certain queen who asks for calamities in her life. Queen Kunti. Yeah, Queen Kunti, she asks for calamities. And again, she's maybe going on the extreme. I don't think any of us are in any position to ask. Maybe some of you are, but I know personally I'm not in any position to really ask Krishna for more calamities, because I'm thinking the calamities I've been given is quite enough. But she certainly asked for that stress, and she's making that into a very positive experience by asking those calamities so that she can think of Krishna and more deeper and being more mindful of Krishna and that. So those are kind of the examples I thought. Any other thoughts? I'll give it like 5 seconds if anybody had thoughts. I
have a question. Is there anything in Shastra about whether we would experience stress in the spiritual world?
Good question. If anyone has any thoughts about that, I have a couple of thoughts, but I'll open it up to other people, because there are some exalted people who actually read Shastra and not like me.
From my memory of hearing, I think from Mugunuga Prabhu's class, was more of like the stress only comes from like that spiritual stress. Even with Vaisheshri Prabhu, that there is a level of stress, but it's so pleasurable. It's so enjoyable, because you have such an innate desire to continue to improve on that service and to serve Krishna in such a high level standard that it's not just this, I don't want to say mundane stress in this material world. It's a different kind of stress. Just like in love, there's a different level of love, from parents to relationship to friendships. So that's from my memory of the spiritual stress.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I agree with that there's, if there is stress, Srimati Radharani does have stress in serving Krishna in the best way possible, but it is nowhere near the debilitating stress that we may feel on this mundane planet, so, or mundane plane or platform. So great question though. Thank you, and thank you, Jessica, for answering. Next thing that I think kind of comes out of that topic, or that certain topic, that video, is fight, flight, or freeze. And they very briefly talk about it. And how many of us have heard fight or flight? Yeah? If you haven't, you can put your thumbs down. I'm totally cool with that. Okay, so yeah, fight or flight is our natural physiological response to any threat or stress. I mean, in this case, we're talking about stress. And there's a third element called freeze as well. So usually in fight, you know, we're attacking the threat. And this is, again, coming from more animal-esque terms, but I think we can all relate to attacking a threat, whether it's with our words, and probably more often with our words, not our hands. Flight, running away or getting away from the situation or the threat, and then freezing, doing nothing and hoping it will all go away, which I totally focus on a lot of the times when I'm dealt with stress. It's just not pay attention to it. So all these types of reactions, again, that word reaction is what I really want to focus on here, is that these fight, flight, or freeze reactions in our life are physiological, right? If we didn't have that physiological level of fight, flight, or freeze, you know, we'd be in a lot more difficult situations. So in one way, Krishna has allowed us to have a body that allows us to react in this way, and it's very helpful in certain stressful situations, but it should not be what we rely on through all of our situations, right? Does that make sense? Like if we were to, and we do it probably on a indirect way, that, you know, we respond by attacking or running away from a situation or just freezing completely. We rely on that quite a lot. And if we're starting to rely just on that and we're not adding the process of thinking and being an individual in this process, we're really not getting any further, right? It's a really passive way to get through life. And so I think a lot of times when we are dealt with stress, we deal with it on this level because, one, it's easy, right? I mean, these physiological responses, sorry to be all nerdy and scientific here, but the reason why we have these physiological responses is because then we don't have to expend so much energy, right? If we were attacked by a bear, or a bear is coming after us, if we had to sit there and go like, okay, so like, what should I do? You know, is there like a lifeline here that I can take right now to be able to get through this right now? No, the easiest thing is flight, get away, get moving. And if we didn't have those physiological responses, you know, we'd have to expend a lot of energy, and our body is created so that we don't have to spend that much energy on it. So I just wanted to highlight that this is kind of like the baseline, what our bodies are giving us, and it's great, but we're wanting to transcend that. We're wanting to move further than that, because that will actually help us manage our stress. Some of the examples that I'm thinking of, and especially again, focusing on that reaction versus responding, I can think of a couple, but again, I want to open it up and have it so it's not just me talking all the time. Ananda Madhava.
I just had a question. Where does distraction fit in? Because you talk about fight, flight, or freeze. And what I see is that definitely these, as you said, they might not be like as gross in the way we think about them, but in a subtle way, yes, right? When we are projected with something, we can use our words to fight, like, you know, or flight in a sense that, oh, I'm just going to, you know, like not do it, or freeze, just like, let me meditate on it and get back to you.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't know what to do right now. But where do distractions fit in? Like, I'm having a hard time seeing that sometimes when the stressors come in, it's like, I want like, and this factors into, you know, procrastination or using distractions to like, as a coping mechanism. So where does that fit in?
I think it doesn't necessarily, like, I could see it fitting into like flight for one example, right? You're trying to get away from a situation, so you're using distractions to get away. I think when we kind of start talking more about coping mechanisms, it'll start to make sense a bit more about where they fit in and how they are coping mechanisms. Procrastination, distraction, they are coping mechanisms. They're just not effective ones, right? So as far as like fight, flight, or freeze, I would typify that into flight, because you're trying to get away from the situation. But I think they transcend a bit of the fight, flight, freeze. I think like the coping mechanisms are kind of the next level, where we try to kind of create our own coping mechanisms. I think that's kind of where it fits. But if we had to like typify, I would say flight. Does that help? Yeah, okay. So any ideas about when in Shastra we've seen fight, flight, or freeze? Reacting without responding? Any thoughts, ideas, comments? Rukmini, you're off your rocker. Yes, Ananda Madhava?
Sorry, I just like Arjuna in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the Gita.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to fight. He definitely wants to flight or freeze. Like he's just, and at the conclusion of chapter 2, it's like complete, like frozen. Right? Like, or
yeah.
chapter 1. Yeah.
There is actual description of Arjuna freezing up that way. Absolutely. It's a great example. Another example that I think of is Parikshit Maharaj, right? Like, I mean, of course, we can say that, it's Krishna's arrangement, of course, Srimad Bhagavatam, all that stuff. But in that instance, Parikshit Maharaj, when he sees Shamika Rishi, he and isn't dealt in a way that he thinks that he should be dealt with water and a proper, invitation. What does he do? He takes the snake and puts it around Shamika Rishi's neck. And then on top of it, Shringi does the exact same thing. His son, he reacts right away. He sees this unbelievable thing, a snake around his father's neck, and he goes, hey, here you go, here's a curse. So right away you see that kind of reaction, that fight in both of them. And whereas when Shamika Rishi comes to and he sees what has happened, his reaction or his response is actually very calm. And in the Bhagavatam, it talks about how he wasn't actually bothered by it. He really wasn't. And he didn't think that it was such an offense. And because he knows that Maharaj Parikshit is such a pious man, right? He took the time to, think about it. Okay, is this regular behavior for, Maharaj Parikshit? No, it's probably something else going on. I'm not offended, and thus I would not have cursed him. And then we see what the ripple effect is afterwards, right? Shamika Rishi goes on to speak about, there's such calamities. The whole Brahminical society has to take this burden of having to, because one of our own has immaturely, cursed Maharaj Parikshit as such a pious man. And then the one thing that, another example that sticks out to me is Dashrath Maharaj from the Ramayana, the father of Lord Ram. And I'm in love right now with Subhalas Prabhu's books on the Ramayana. They're fantastic. I don't have my copy here, but if you do get a chance, do read it. It's really, really well written. And he, I never thought of the example of Dashrath Maharaj and Shravan, the boy that takes care of his blind parents, to be an example of fight, flight, or freeze, or an example of how Dashrath Maharaj doesn't think through things. If you recall, Dashrath Maharaj he's out hunting, he hears some rustling, and he right away shoots his arrow without thinking that it might not be a deer. It could be any other possible thing other than a deer that's rustling. And then the severe consequences that come from it. And I didn't know this beforehand, but Dashrath Maharaj has this type of archery, and I forget what it's called. I think it's like sonic archery, which basically he uses sound as a way to meet his target. And so Shravan actually, because of this whole incident, he has to ban that type of archery from his from Ayodhya, because he's seen how ineffective it was. But to be really honest, that was Dashrath Maharaj's fault. He wasn't thinking through. I mean, again, I'm not trying to put down such an exalted devotee. I'm not doing that. But I'm just saying, if we were to bring it down to our own terms, he went right away into fight. And there was no time to really think things through. Of course, hunting requires that. But at that time, he was just using sonic archery. Could have been any other animal, rustling through the leaves. And unfortunately, this is the case that happened to him. And then he's cursed as well, that he will also feel separation from his son. So again, all these incredible ripple effects. Okay, I'm going to move on. Do you guys see that window with all your faces? Or do you just see the screen?
I can see both.
Okay, so I'm just going to move this over on this side so you can see. So perception, another big thing that comes out of stress, and it ties in with this example of the bucket, right? That people can have different sizes of buckets without your knowledge. I'm going to keep on bringing the bucket now more and more because we're going to use this as a way to understand our own stress. But this example of the bucket and how we perceive our own buckets, how much it can hold as far as stress. And then I think another element and another part of stress that comes out for me when I'm thinking about perception is that, you know, a large part of stress is also the insecurities. I think Malvika was touching upon that earlier on, that there's a lot of insecurities when it comes to stress. And sometimes it is the cause of stress, or it can be the result of stress. But either way, there is this insecurity about, you know, I see, for example, right now, I'm a mother of an 11th month old right now. And I see all the other Instagram mummies doing, you know, for whatever they can or whatever they do. And it might be more than I do, it might be less than I do, but it is a source of stress because, you know, I want to be able to perform at that level as well. But there's a whole other part of it, right? It's not just because we're both moms and we must have the exact same amount of stress or have the same amount of non-stress, but, you know, this perception that, you know, the stress that I'm having, you should also have the same amount. And thus, if you are performing at a better level than I am, how could you? We have the same amount of stress. So I think, you know, I'm trying to, again, bring this sense of how stress can be manageable. If we are understanding that stress is more based on subjectivity or perception, then it starts to pull away and starts to show stress as something that's malleable and it's flexible and it's something that we can manipulate. I like to, I mean, in my work, we use manipulation in a positive way too. Manipulation always sounds very negative, but manipulate here, I'm just talking about that you're able to move it around. If stress is coming down to perception, then we should be able to kind of bend to our own needs. And if we can perceive it at a much less level, it's much easier to manage. Is that making sense? Yes, thumbs up, cool, yeah, okay. And okay, so the example that I thought of for perception, and if anyone else has any ideas, please put up your hand and let me know. But my husband and I have been reading Srimad Bhagavatam, and we're reading this part of Canto 6, where there's a moment where King Chitraketu, he is, sorry, I don't understand Srimad Bhagavatam stories unless I make it really silly. So basically what happens is Chitraketu is just flying by doing his own thing, and he sees Lord Shiva speaking about Shastra, and Mother Parvati is sitting on his lap. And Chitraketu just starts laughing at it. Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing at this because it's Bhagavatam, but I just think it's a funny situation. And so Chitraketu laughs for his own reason. Lord Shiva, his reaction is no reaction. And this has happened a couple of times to Lord Shiva, right? It happens when he's met with Daksha as well, where he's kind of he's not bothered by it. Sorry, I see some chats here. Okay. And so, you know, Lord Shiva has no reaction. So he's kind of just like, whatever, I don't have a reaction to this, whatever, I'm doing my own thing. Parvati is like, nah, you can't make fun of my husband like that. And she right away, what does she do? And of course, Bhagavatam, it's Bhagavatam. We know we curse all the times. So what does she do? She curses Chitraketu right then and there. She's like, you know, you'll be born as a demon and all these kind of things. And Chitraketu's response is awesome. He just kind of laughs it off. He's like, look, it wasn't that serious, man. Like, I was just laughing at a situation. Shiva doesn't care. He's cool with it. But you know what, Mother Parvati, you're the mother. I'll take it. No problem. Like, could you imagine if you're in that situation, if you're Chitraketu and you laughed at something, or if you've been, I do this a lot of times, you've inadvertently offended someone and you're like, it wasn't that offensive. And Chitraketu's just like, no, man, it's cool. You want to curse me? No problem. I'll deal with it. If that was me, I'd be like, you're not cursing me. I did not mean that way. Try to explain myself out of it. Might curse myself back. And, you know, so I think it was just a perfect example of how in Shastra that there is still fight, flight, or freeze. Again, we're using this physiological response thing in a more liberal way, but it still kind of helps to understand that, you know, there are a lot of times where we instantly react and we don't put any thought into it. So I thought that was fun. Any other thoughts? Sorry, before I go into the next one. Thoughts, comments?
Your story reminded me of when in the Bhagavatam as well, it's talked about how Yamaraj was cursed, born, and then he got born as Vidura, and even he was like, yeah, it's fine, like whatever, like it's chilling, bro.
It's chilling, man, no problem, I'll take this curse. And I'd be sitting like, no, can we backtrack? I don't want this curse, I don't want it, please give me something else, let's work this out together.
There's so many, that was such a wonderful example, because now it's just like Arjuna, when he got cursed to live as a woman.
Yeah.
And then he became Prahanala or something. I don't know how to, Prahanala? I think that was the name.
Your guess is better than mine, so we'll go with that.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting that, like, even when, you're so right that if somebody says anything like that, you'll be like, excuse me, what? Right.
Let's reverse this. This is not how, I'm putting down my Uno reverse. Back to you, man. I am not taking that curse. You take it. And again, I'd probably put a few curse words or curses myself, sorry, but it's true. I'd probably be really upset at that time and really start fighting at that moment. So it's just interesting that in Shastra that happens. I don't have time, but I'll share my favorite Bhagavatam story, or from the Mahabharata. I think it's the most hilarious thing ever, but I'll share it afterwards. Okay, next is, of course, the effects on our bodies and mental health. I mean, I think that's a no-brainer. I think we all see the effects, and Ananda Madhava gave the example of Arjuna, and that was the example that I was going to give for effects as well, that, you know, Arjuna has a physical reaction, and it says in text 29 in the Bhagavad Gita, my whole body is trembling, my hair is standing on end, my bogandiva is slipping from my hand, and my skin is burning. Now those are intense feelings of stress, and I don't blame the guy. I mean, he's about to fight you know, his cousin brothers on the other end, his teachers, all those things. Why wouldn't he be feeling that stress? But I think we can take inspiration from Arjuna and his experience that, you know, at least by the end of the Bhagavad Gita, he's ready to perform for Krishna. So hopefully we can feel the same way too. And
maybe we could also add effect on spiritual health.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share something from your side?
Well, I'm just thinking that when I'm very stressed out about work or other things, then it's harder to focus on my spiritual practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also there's, you know, even if you were born in Krishna consciousness or not, or if you've come at a younger age, there is this stress of performance as well, right? Like we value, or we measure our Krishna consciousness by the number of rounds that we do, by how many books you read. Like who's sitting around talking about, like, you know, who thinks of someone as an exalted devotee because of how Krishna conscious they are? No, we base it on how many services they're doing, you know, how many, you know, sannyasis they're talking to, are they initiated, are these all these values that we attach to. And it's so funny because we're a society that focuses on not focusing on bodily conceptions, and here we are attaching these bodily attachments, right? And again, this performance stress to perform at a really high level and be the best devotee you can. And so much is lost in between that, right? So much is lost. Our actual Krishna consciousness is lost because we're trying to perform at a very high level. So certainly these effects on our bodies and mental health. I don't want to spend too much time, also because I'm watching the time as well, but suffice to say that there are very real effects of stress on our bodies and on our mental health. And they certainly can take a toll. And it's the reason why stress is such a huge topic right now. And, you know, just even doing a quick Google search for this research, you know, it comes up right away, and it has such a negative connotation. So I'm hoping that talking about all these things about stress is starting to kind of make it a bit smaller and manageable, because that's what we're trying to get to. We're not saying this talk isn't about how to remove stress from your life, because I don't think that's possible. You know, we have examples from our Shastra, and Krishna says it very clearly, like, dude, it doesn't work that way. So let's make it in such a way that we can manage it and we can coexist with stress. So I'm going to put you guys back over here. Here's my lovely diagram of a bucket. It's the worst picture ever, but it's the best one I could find. So I really wanted to focus on this bucket analysis, or a bucket analogy that's given in the talk, because I think it's really helpful. It helps to, I'm a visual learner, so it really helps me to visualize what kind of, what are the different dynamics of stress. So quickly, So the bucket, so this is not going to help. I'm going to put you guys over here. So the bucket, and that they're using this analogy is kind of speaking about the bucket itself is based on our genes, our characteristics, and I'm adding in, of course, the Krishna conscious element of karma. So the actual size of our bucket is based on all those things. And the water that's actually flowing in is our everyday stresses, right? So whether they're positive, they're negative, those are what's flowing into our bucket. And then, of course, the little tap that we have here, which are kind of our coping mechanisms. So this is kind of, taking off another layer about stress. Instead of it just being a label, we've kind of given it, the opportunity to understand that, it's inevitable. It has, fight or flight and freeze. We have the effects on our mental health and all that, and perception as well. But now we're taking it to the next level and talking about coping mechanisms, because if we didn't have any coping mechanisms, positive or negative, we'd be overflowing at all times, and we'd probably we wouldn't be able to handle it at all. So of course, the first activity is let's draw. So you have that paper and pen nearby you. I really want you to take the time to draw your own bucket. If we have a chance, we might show it to everybody, but if not, it's totally okay. It's probably a personal thing anyways, but draw your own bucket, and, keep in mind how big of a bucket were you given, right? Based on what you think, your upbringing, your genes. A lot of how we handle stress, based on research, does come from our parents. It is biological to some degree. And as everything, there's nature versus nurture and all that stuff. But some of it does come from our parents and our upbringing. Also think about how many different faucets, or kind of like the water that's flowing into your bucket, do you have at a time? Of course, they gave some really great examples, and probably a lot of them we agree with, whether it's school, whether it's work, family, pressures and whatnot, but really take some time to think about it on your own, about what are your personal faucets that are coming in. And then, of course, are there any taps that are helping you to not overflow? And then the mother really helped us with understanding that, distractions like Netflix, if you want to give it a name, those are coping mechanisms. If there are ways that you relieve your stress, whether you think society or this group will value it as good or bad, put it down, because it is something that helps you cope. Late night Netflix sessions do help me cope to a certain degree, and I'm going to draw that myself. So I'll give you about a minute or so. I'm going to give us 30 more seconds. More seconds. Alrighty. I see a lot of heads down, so I imagine you're still working on it. And just for the interest of time, I'm gonna get us to keep on going. But I really think it's a great exercise just to visualize what you have coming in and what you have going out. And once you've kind of put it down on paper, then it helps to give it, you can start to think about prioritization, of coping mechanisms. If you think about a bucket, the taps towards the bottom are probably the more effective ones versus the ones that are at the top. And the video kind of goes into it, but I didn't want to present that video too much, but it talks about false taps, right? Things that we think are helping us cope, but they're really not in the long term of things. Those might be closer to the top, which again, you're like, oh, I have lots of taps, but really they're not doing much. If you've seen those, like those brain teaser games, and they have like a thing, they have water flowing in, and it's like, which bucket's going to fill up quicker? Like, it's kind of like that, right? We have these kind of false taps that we think are really helping us out, but they're really not. All right, so we're going to continue to move on, and probably get to more of the central part of our talk, if that helps. Sorry, I'm going to move this just a bit lower. So obviously, if we're talking about stress, we've kind of given a definition. We've brought it down to something that's a bit more malleable. So I'm just moving my notes down. Yeah. So we kind of made stress into something a bit more malleable, something that's flexible, something that's manipulative, or that we can manipulate, and change. And also now looking at your buckets in front of you, maybe it's working for you, and that's great. Then you don't have to listen to the rest of the talk. But if it isn't working for you and you want to, I think this is where we're going to talk about more about the managing of stress. We're coexisting with our stress, so how do we manage it? We have to be able to live with it. Just like if you're going to marry someone, you're going to have to make sure that you can manage that person and be able to live with them. In the same way, we're trying to do that with stress. So if you can have your chat box ready, I'm going to ask a question, and we'll come back to it later, kind of trying to answer it. But for now, a little like pop quiz or just a poll, actually not a quiz. That makes it sound like I'm testing you on something, but just a little thing. So stress management in the realm of this bucket analogy, what does it mean to you? Okay, so does it A, mean changing the size of your bucket? Does it mean B, changing the amount of faucets flowing into your bucket? Or C, adding more taps to your bucket, so more of those coping mechanisms? So you can write A, B, or C in the chat box. And I just curious to what you think.
Actual poll, or do you just want to write it?
Could you say that one more time?
You want me to do an actual poll and get people?
Is that possible? Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. Give me 2 seconds.
Man, Zoom is awesome. Who else feels that like this is like the new normal and you're okay with it? Anybody feel that? Like with Zoom, like I feel like I'm okay with it. Okay, so I see B and C. Very cool. But you're making a poll, so we'll see properly. I feel like we need to have like Jeopardy music in the background.
Right? I wish I thought about that.
This is what you need to get on Malvika.
I wish I jumped into your head and thought about that.
What is the question again, Rukmini? Could you phrase it one more time?
Sorry, stress management means, and then there's A, B, and C. And Malvika, maybe I can do a time check.
Yes, so maybe another 15-20 minutes, and then we should probably wrap up.
Okay, that sounds good. I can do that.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, so there's a tap. Oh, sorry, not tap. There's a poll going on. I'm reading the question at the same time. All right. All right, so a lot of people are saying adding more taps to your bucket. This is so cool. And then Madhava, thank you for sharing or showing that this is possible. Awesome. All right, so again, we're not going to take up, we're not going to, see, okay, analyze, but I think this is kind of helping us understand. And again, at the end of the day, like all this that I'm presenting is kind of one way to think of stress, right? We've already kind of come to a point where like stress is this huge thing and whatnot. So at the end of the day, I could be saying all these things, and this is one perspective that I'm sharing. You hear other, talks about and proper talks from people like, the real Rukmini Devi Dasi, you probably get a better answer. But this is kind of what my crazy nerdy mind kind of thinks of when I see stress. So I just wanted to stress that point, that this is just one perspective. So yeah, so I see here like adding more taps to your bucket is kind of heading up, but everybody is kind of feeling a different way. So that's awesome. So we'll come back to this towards the end of the conversation. Close this. All right. So here's this beautiful lady over here. How do I get here, right? How do we get to a point where, and I really like this image because, a lot of things are going on. She's meditating, getting into this kind of Zen mode, even though there's 100 things or 100 people around her trying to get her attention, she's still being able to manage her stress. And that's what we want, right? I was looking at images and I saw one that was like stress-free zone. And I put that up first. I'm like, well, technically we're not looking for a stress-free zone because we've already established that's inevitable, right? Stress is going to be there and we're trying to coexist with it. So really removing all types of stress really is not going to allow us to really get through anything. because if that were the case, then you'd be sitting in bed all day long because there's no stress to get up and move on and be productive in any way. It's still some days that's how I function, but we'll leave that on the side for now. So, of course, as you can imagine, doing this mindfulness course, one of the biggest answers of stress, or the solutions to stress, is mindfulness. Duh, right? I mean, I just did a course on it. Why wouldn't I bring up mindfulness in this? So yeah, actually, it is one of the main solutions given for stress. If you Google it up, or whatever search engine you use, Bing, or like there's this go duck or something like that. My husband's, anyways, whatever search engine you use or decide, a lot of, if you say like solutions to stress, mindfulness is one of them. And again, mindfulness is this really big topic. It's a buzzword right now. Oh, you need to be mindful in these stressful times. Self-care is very important. Yeah, it is. But I think mindfulness is this really big term again, and it really boils down to a few strong tenets. And I think another part of it is also how well it gels with our own philosophy as well. So it's not really any surprise that how much this kind of gels with our philosophy, and that's kind of where I'm going to take us on. So we've talked about stress. We talked about how we can, again, make it malleable. That's like my key word today, being able to manipulate it. And now, how do we do so? And this is one way to kind of deal with stress. And this is the way that I think of stress, or how I deal with stress. But again, there's so many other ways. So again,
Rukmini, would you mind
yes.
defining mindfulness? Because I always thought that mindfulness was the same as meditation, and that's what you've shown here on the slide. But I spoke to someone else who said that mindfulness and meditation are very different. So would you mind elaborating on that? Thanks.
Lucky for you, I have a definition straight up for you. Had it already planned. So Jon Kabat-Zinn is one of like the forefront people of mindfulness right now. He has created a lot of therapies around mindfulness that are very effective for alcoholism, for depression, for just even dealing with straight up anxieties. He's been doing that. He's like the Srila Prabhupada of like mindfulness right now. Best way to describe him. And his definition that's kind of populated everywhere is mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So obviously some very key words there. So first and foremost, paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, which you'll hear a lot about in mindfulness. And a word that doesn't necessarily come out a lot when we're talking about the tenets of mindfulness, but is so key, is non-judgmentally, right? How much value we add. So one thing is, of course, like the negative way to put judgment on something, oh, that's not cool, or that's awesome, or that's, whatever. Non-judgmentally also means not adding value, right? So when we think, the best example I can think of is productivity, right? We automatically put a positive spin on productivity, or we evaluate it as a very, good thing, right? If you've had a very productive day, who puts up on their Instagram that I had a very unproductive day, right? Unless they're trying to get, sympathy or just wanting to share. I'm not saying that everybody's looking for sympathy, but I'm just saying, like, who puts up, I had a very unproductive day. No one does that with like, beautiful leaves or what. You put up, I've had a very productive day. But we can already see, like, and I'm using social media very specifically, is because, when we start to add those values to it, yeah, you might have had a productive day, but you might have used that productivity as a distraction for something else, right? I've done that plenty of times when you come up with that list of things to do that day, and everybody says, write down all the things that you have to do that day, and then you cross out the simple ones and not do the one that's like the biggest one that has the biggest priority, because you're like, I need to be productive. I did 9 out of my 10 things. That's a productive day. But I also had to finish this presentation by tomorrow, and I didn't touch it. So really, was I that productive? So that's kind of what it's taking away. So back to your question, Shweta, about the difference between mindfulness and meditation. I didn't really focus on it today for this talk. But I would say mindfulness is more a way of lifestyle, or it's a type of lifestyle, trying to be mindful, paying attention, being in the present moment. Whereas meditation is a means of being mindful. So you can use meditation as a way to be mindful. You can use meditation a way to be, paying attention to the present moment, right? And we see that in our own Krishna consciousness, in our japa, that we're trying to be mindful of Krishna in that particular moment. Does that help, Shweta, to kind of give a bit of definition and also
Yeah.
difference between
I feel like mindfulness is more of a lifestyle and a meditation is maybe an activity to get to that lifestyle. Okay.
Yeah, and with mindfulness, again, sorry to get nerdy again, but like when they do like studies on mindfulness, like they also differentiate, like someone could be saying that I'm a mindful person all the time. Whereas, you know, some studies are looking at, if you do a 6-week course in mindfulness, can you now react to things in a mindful way? Which is confusing, it's annoying, but for the purposes of today's discussion, mindfulness just means to paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And I think what was really cool when I was learning about mindfulness is really talking about the main tenets and how much it relates to our own lives. So the first thing that mindfulness talks about is suffering, which is such a crazy thing to think about. But mindfulness actually stems from a lot of Hinduism and Buddhism, which is probably you know, pertains to us as devotees quite a bit. But mindfulness speaks about suffering, and the same thing, that suffering is inevitable. So stress and suffering, they're talking about it being an inevitable thing. It's what unites us, all of us humans, in that we all suffer in some way, shape, or form. And we can, you know, if you did a timeline of your lives, you would see that there is moments of suffering, even though there's very high points, there are still moments of suffering. So that actually is an experience that unites us all and, you know, brings us all to that level. And once we accept that we suffer, compassion is possible. And it's one of the other tenets of mindfulness, that we're able to be compassionate not only to the other people, because we now know that, hey, they're also suffering on their own levels, but we can also be compassionate to ourselves, which is a really important point, that we can be compassionate to ourselves. If we're seeing or suffering our own selves, we can be less judgmental to ourselves. And that another cool thing about suffering in this frame is that suffering and pain are two very different things. Suffering is inevitable, but the pain we feel comes down to perception. Another thing that kind of relates to this conversation about stress. And so it's possible to be happy or content, even though we might be suffering, because the pain itself that we're experiencing is malleable, it's manipulative. You can manipulate, and then perceive it in the way that you can. So I think it's a very important point, and it's one of the biggest things that come out of mindfulness is that, or when we're, you know, delving into mindfulness, is this point of suffering, and they really push that point that you suffer. But you know, it's twofold. It's one, the actual, they call it 2 arrows of suffering. One is the actual event itself that is causing your suffering, and 2, the perceived sense of suffering. So just how, you know, 2 people might be met with the same, you know, situation, but may deal with it in different ways. It again comes back to this perception and this subjectivity. And then, you know, bringing back to Bhagavad Gita in our own lives, you know, Krishna very clearly says in the 8th chapter, 15th verse, Dukhalayam ashashvatam, right? That the world is full of miseries and temporary. And, you know, if we were just to hold on to that concept, how many things would be figured out? But of course we don't, because there's so many things going on in our lives. But suffice to say that, you know, Krishna is very clear about that as well, that this world is full of miseries and temporary. And the sooner that we understand that, the sooner we can start to kind of get away from this objectivity of suffering and stress. The next thing, and again, huge thing that comes in mindfulness, is present moment awareness. And that is just being in that moment. You can even think about, you know, moments in your own life where you might be in a situation, but you were completely in the past. For example, brushing your teeth. How many of us are thinking mindfully how you're brushing your teeth? Or is that a moment to think about your task list for the day? What happened 5 years ago? Oh my God, I have a great comeback for that lady who said something to me at the grocery line, and I have something so wicked I could say to her now, and I'm playing it all out of my head. You are not thinking of brushing your teeth. There is no way that you are sitting going, you know, right molar, left molar, you know, like you're not thinking about that. Or I know this has happened to me a couple of times where I'm driving and I'm driving back home. So I know my way back home. I'm not thinking about it. And there are times where I look back and I'm like, did I just drive through a red light? I was not paying attention, right? How many times we think we're present, but we are not. or we're stuck in the future, right? It's one thing to be stuck in the past, but you could be also stuck in the future. You're daydreaming, you're doing all those things. You are not in the present moment. So mindfulness really pushes or stresses the point of being present, being aware of the present moment, to not be stuck in the past or the future, and not slipping into that. Again, I'm sorry that I'm not having so much discussion points over here, but we'll have a chance to open up in a little while. Next one is gratitude. Such a beautiful word. And of course, gratitude certainly means, like being grateful for, the people in your lives and all those things. But in mindfulness, what it's trying to dig deeper in is to being grateful for the situations you're in. So being grateful, and now bringing it back to our stress and everything, we're being grateful for the stress that we have in our life. And it sounds so weird. You're not going like, thank you so much for not letting me get into the university I want to, or thank you so much. Like it's not this kind of flowery thing, though it can be. I mean, each to their own. I'm not a huge flowery person in that sense, but you can think of it in that way. But I think what it really, really comes down to is gratitude. And for me, what matches it very clearly to me is acceptance. So, I have to be grateful for the situation and be able to accept it where it is. So even though I could be like, yeah, thanks, Krishna, I really, really wanted to not get, be in the situation, I also have to come to a point of acceptance that I may not be so, like overjoyed by not being met with this, roadblock in my life, but I also have to come to accept it. And I think that really helps the gratitude. It magnifies, or it multiplies the feeling of gratitude in those situations. And when we accept those negative emotions, thoughts, events for what they are, it's easier to let them go and understand that they're fleeting, right? If we can accept them when we meet them, how they talk about like, I saw this quote last time. What was it? You've conquered 100% of the events, or 100% of the bad events that have happened in your life, right? Because if you're standing right now and breathing and living, you have conquered everything that's happened in your past. So meeting with that with gratitude, and also understanding that it's going to be fleeting. And we see that in the Bhagavad Gita as well. I think, again, Bhagavad Gita and this whole concept that we're talking about today fits so well. Krishna speaks in second chapter. I have the verse here. Why am I trying to remember it? The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Yeah, Krishna, I'm still working on the tolerate part and not being disturbed. But the beginning part is I think what I'm focusing on here is that the non-permanent appearance, that they're temporary, right? So just as, the great events are unfortunately temporary, the bad events are also going to be temporary, and we can be grateful for them at that time. And kind of what I was saying before about compassion, of course, if we accept that we're suffering, another person is also suffering, we can be compassionate towards them, but really focusing on compassion to ourselves and the desire to self-soothe. The desire to want to overcome your own stresses. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Like if we're talking about secrets of coexisting with stress, I think it's really the ability to trust and care for yourself and showing compassion for yourself that you're able to overcome or able to deal with your stresses. I think we get stuck, a lot of us get stuck behind, just seeing the pile of stress, or just seeing how much is coming into our bucket, and not realizing that, if I give myself some compassion, maybe I can work through it, right? If I give myself compassion, I'm able to open up to others and try to work through it. So I think that's, again, I was thinking like how to incorporate secrets, and I really wasn't able to, because a lot of the secrets are well known. It's just really having to look at them and saying like, I got to do the hard work and do it. So for me, that's where kind of compassion comes in. And then the last point is of self-awareness. And I think this goes really well with our Krishna consciousness, because being self-aware means that I'm aware of the fact that I'm not this body, I am the soul, right? It really, really comes down to that. And in the world of mindfulness, they're talking about on a bit more superficial level, but they're just talking about wanting to turn inwards, right? And our Krishna consciousness allows that, right? We are dealing inwardly. We are dealing with a lot of our own emotions. But for, say, the, layman or the world out there, just even having to turn inwards is actually a very negative and not so pleasing activity to do, to kind of look inwards and really dig deep where our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings are coming from. And really just wanting to slow things down and really look at our internal behaviors. So even though, externally things are happening, looking inwards to see what is the root cause of our feelings so far. So I know I know I'm repeating myself, but I feel like I'm jumping to two different concepts. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That, we talked about stress, but now we're talking about solutions. And I'm kind of using mindfulness more as a tool to kind of understand how we can cope with stress. Hope that's kind of coming clear. And the reason why I'm going through these tenets is because one, it relates to our discussion about stress, about how there's so many similarities of understanding suffering and stress and all those things. And then also now taking it to the next level about how mindfulness kind of works within our spiritual bounds. So bringing it back to that bucket analogy, mindfulness is what it's doing to our bucket is that it's helping to choose effective taps. So those coping mechanisms that are on the side of our bucket, ones that are going to be effective, ones that are going to work. If we are able to be mindful of, we're not this body, we're the soul, being able to turn inwardly, being compassionate, being grateful, and accepting what we're receiving, we can start to choose more effective taps. So that means that, yes, Netflix late at night, certainly it's a great way to unwind late at night. Is it really going to help me get up in the morning? Nah. And is that not getting up in the morning early enough going to add more stress and add more water coming into my bucket? Absolutely. And maybe that's the case for me. But Netflix and chilling out, if that's your tap, that's your tap. And if it's an effective one, keep it. No one's saying that, it depends on your own perception and on how it affects your bucket in and of itself. And then, the second aspect, bringing again back to this bucket, mindfulness is helping us to perceive water coming in a more positive light, right? Again, as opposed to all that water or all that stress gushing into your bucket, you're really starting to fine tune it. And maybe it's coming at a more steady pace. Maybe it's coming, with less force. Or, you're just able to see it for what it is, that it is just water flowing into my bucket. Whether it's positive or negative, it is inevitable. But how I perceive it is what changes. So again, we're talking about stress, we're talking about mindfulness, and now what it's doing for us. And again, this is just one way to kind of coexist or cope with stress. But I think what it really does for me, and why I speak of it very highly, and having studied it for a while, is that it starts to humanize what stress is, or starts to humanize what our suffering is. And humanize in the sense that it doesn't seem like this tangly blob anymore. It's something that I can change and I can have manipulation. And even though, ego and our Krishna consciousness is like, nuh-uh, but in this sense, it is in my circle of influence. I can control my stress. It's not that the stress is controlling me, which is sometimes what we do, right? I know I do this, that I play the victim card. Like, I have so much stress. I'm the victim of this stress. This is all coming upon me. And there's no way to, figure it out. It's like, dude, no, you can figure it out. You can control your stress and how much is coming into your bucket. So doing my research and, kind of the course and whatnot, I thought that it would be nice to share some practical ways to be mindful. So, and again, I know we're at 1:27, so I'm going to start to wind up. We're towards the end. I do have an activity, but we'll see how that goes with question and answers. I've kept it all the way at the end, so not an issue. And if we don't do it, it's totally cool. But, one obvious way, and you'll see this a lot with mindfulness practice, is observing your breath. If you're like me, when I started doing this, I was like, I'm not observing my breathing. This is weird. And they tell you to close your eyes, and it sounds airy-fairy, but I promise you it actually is really effective. We see that in the Bhagavad Gita too. There is a lot of emphasis in the 6th chapter about, observing your breathing and using that as a technique. But in the world of mindfulness, observing your breathing is just helping you to ground, right? We're so external. We're now trying to bring our awareness inward. So you'll see a lot of these techniques about, putting your hand on your chest, one on your belly, and, feeling the inward and the outward flow of your breathing. And again, it's just a great technique to just calm yourself down and bring yourself to a certain level that you could start being more inward and more effective that way. Another one is connecting with nature. It's an easy one. I know we're all Canadians here, so connecting with nature is starting to slow down. I don't think anybody's going to want to connect with the snow. But if you do, you can certainly still do that. Fall is wonderful all across Canada. So it's a great time, but connecting with nature, again, removing yourself away from your social media, from your digital stuff, and being able to connect with nature that way. And again, I'm not spending too much explaining this. I think it makes sense, right? Like I think we've all experienced that time where we've gone out in nature, took some great Instagram photos, that like it is nice to be out and connecting with the nature. You know, if you have to take a couple Instagram pictures, no judgment there, you go ahead and do that. Giving yourself 10 minutes daily, a huge one. I remember long time ago speaking to one of my mentors and going like, she's like, so have you planned out your life? And I'm like, no. And or like planned out the next few months. I'm like, no. She's like, what do you need to plan I'm like, I just need time to plan what I want to do. She's like, first of all, she's like, what the heck are you talking about? And two, it reminds me of how much time we don't give ourselves to like actually sit, think, plan, focus on anything. We're just like, go, 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 go. I remember like younger, like at nighttime, I'd like, okay, this is like too much information, but whatever. I daydream like a lot when I was a kid. And I've observed over the years that I've just had no time to like overthink, or I mean, actually I do find time to overthink, but like time to like just think and just be myself and just daydream. Like that hasn't happened in a while. And it's because I don't give myself time for that. I don't give myself to just be me and not have expectations piling upon. And that was one of the things that I wrote for my bucket, was just expectations. How much of that stress comes into my bucket all the time. And alongside with giving yourself 10 minutes daily is just observing your thoughts. One of the exercises that mindfulness kind of goes through in the first 3 stages is, you know, just looking out your window and just observing what you see, and not putting not attaching any sort of judgment towards it. So like if I were to look at my window, I'm not looking across to my neighbor and saying like, oh, they have great curtains. I really need curtains for my house. Oh my God, I haven't done curtains. You know, how much is it going to cost me? That's a judgment, right? That's the overthinking part of it. But observing it is just observing the color of the curtains and the texture it has, and observing the clouds and the texture they have. So observing your thoughts is, again, pushing yourself and getting you to practice to step away from the judgment or the value that we put onto things. And then of course, writing them down and journaling. That's another great effective way. A lot of people attest to just, you know, opening up their book in the morning and just free flow writing. Doesn't have to make any sense, just write whatever's on your mind. And a lot of people attest to how that just helps them clear themselves in the morning, and allows them to kind of think things through. And of course, it goes without saying, mantra meditation. I mean, we already have it. But it is actually a way to be mindful, and not the mechanical chanting that I do, but actually being mindful of Krishna in every word that you are chanting. And then most importantly is overall, do what feels best for you. If you don't like to write, don't write. Don't write in a journal. Don't go out and buy that cool Michaels. I love going to Michaels, but don't go to Michaels and buy like that really fancy journal if you weren't going to write in it. Don't push yourself to be mindful. Pick and choose things that are effective, that you feel like you're going to be able to be consistent about, and go from there. So again, these are just 5 things that I thought of. But hold up. What about Krishna? We talked all about this. We're all together as spiritual seekers, as devotees, and we haven't talked about Krishna at all, right? I thought, okay, sorry, can I just go back to that? Sorry. Now it's gonna take forever to come up. I thought this was really cool. I just want to point out that I did this on Keynote and I spent like good 5-10 minutes figuring this out. Thank you, Malvika. Thank you, Shweta. Thank you for the encouragement.
Can we all get emojis to draw for Rukmini for this? Because I know she spent so much time on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Learned anything. This is what I'm going to teach you after this. What did you learn from the talk? Oh, we learned how to do cool graphics in Keynote. Sorry, I was very proud of this. And I thought it was really cool. Okay, but what about Krishna? Let's focus on big man. All right. If it hasn't been clear enough to you guys already, mindfulness is being mindful of Krishna. Like any of these 5 ways to be mindful of Krishna, could you not easily put Krishna into this equation? Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, like, you know, you do the research, you think about stress, you do all these things, you think about it on a physiological level, on a theoretical level, all these things. And then you look up on Google, hey, what's the solution to being, solution to stress? And say, oh, be mindful. And they're giving you all these things. We already have this in our lives. We can be mindful of Krishna. I just choose to be passive about it, right? Like I'm initiated, you know, I chant my 16 rounds, you know, I can read a bit of Shastra here and there. I don't mind it. So I'm very passive in my Krishna consciousness. But can I really say that I'm mindful of Krishna, or I'm actually conscious of Krishna? No, right? Like, why am I surprised by the amount of stress that I have in my life, or my perception of stress, when I am not being mindful of Krishna in my so-called practices? Right? I'm being very honest here. Yeah, I chant my 16 rounds. I'll probably get them done by midnight, in between getting my daughter to sleep. That's when I'm getting my rounds done. Is it the best? No. Does my spiritual master know about it? Yes, he knows about it. And we've discussed it. And it's not that I'm not taking responsibility of it. I am. But, you know, I just really keep on thinking about this, about our Krishna consciousness, and especially in our lives where we're trying to make sense of our Krishna consciousness within our material lives, is that, you know, we're doing the process, but how much are we focusing on the results? And two, how much of the process are we actually being Krishna conscious? Because if we are conscious of the fact that I am the soul and I'm not the body, like that takes care of all these issues, right? It takes care of all those mindfulness things that, you know, like suffering and all that stuff. Then it becomes very easy to understand. But because we're not mindful of Krishna, or we're not trying to at least be mindful of Krishna, I shouldn't put such a huge thing on you guys to say that you have to be mindful of Krishna. But if we're not trying to be mindful of Krishna, like, are we really surprised by the end result or not? Right? Like, are we really surprised that things aren't working our way because we are not mindful of that? We are not the controller, he's the controller. Like, these stresses are not coming of their own volition, right? Like, they're not, you know, Krishna's not sitting up there going, surprise, like, ta-da, here's another stressful event for you. You know, like, this is happening because of the laws of karma. This is happening because of a lot of what we do. So why are we surprised by it? So I think taking it now into a positive light, you know, is that let's look at these kind of practical ways to be mindful. Let's look at those mindfulness tenets and add Krishna into it. And I think that's the one shortcoming of when I'm looking at mindfulness, or when I was studying mindfulness and I continue studying mindfulness, is that, again, taking it from a Krishna conscious perspective, not like just in a academic way, that when you look at mindfulness, it's telling you to like observe your breathing, connect with nature, doing all these things and being inward and all that. That's what Krishna consciousness is trying to tell us too. All Krishna consciousness is doing is giving you a target. Mindfulness doesn't talk about a target, doesn't talk about anything. But here we're given the name, we're given the form, we're given the qualities of Krishna. We have something to focus on. We're not focusing into the abyss of everything, because we already know that doesn't work, right? Arjuna's like, dude, my mind is like the wind. I cannot control it. And I would, you know, argue with Arjuna, my mind is like a tornado. It's not coming anywhere close to like being managed. So, you know, I think, you know, again, secrets of coexisting with, you know, stress, that's a topic, that's what we're talking about today. But I'm here to kind of say that there's really no secret. We're given the secret. It might be secrets for other people, but we as Krishna conscious, or as people who are trying to follow the path of bhakti, we got the secrets. We have it. It just requires us to be more mindful, more conscious of it, and actually take the literal sense of being Krishna conscious as being conscious of Krishna, and how much that can help us. And so sorry guys, I have like a few more slides and I promise I'm done talking and you won't have to listen to me any further. But taking it back to this bucket analogy, being mindful of Krishna's and being mindful in general is just really affecting the size of our bucket and how much we can handle, right? If, you know, we're mindful of Krishna, you know, things like being grateful, being accepting of our situation, it starts to build and starts to create a bigger foundation for our bucket, and also open it up a bit bigger that, you know, even though there's like Queen Kunti, as more calamities come, she's able to kind of deal with it, because her focus is not upon the calamities. Her focus is on how I can focus on Krishna, right? Her focus has now changed so that her bucket's is, you know, big as a pool. Bring them on, Krishna. I'm cool with it because I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on you. So bring it all together, and it's coming near, I promise you all. You know, we've talked about stress, it being, you know, being something that is more subjective than it is objective. There is the sense of the actual activity, but how much we actually attach a certain feeling, or how much we perceive stress to be. And looking at the ways that stress can affect us. I mean, we kind of briefly talked about that, but also understanding that stress is inevitable, and all these things. Understanding about stress is that it's helping us to understand that it's something that we can change, and it's not a big mess of things. It's something we can handle and control to some degree. And then using mindfulness as a tool to kind of help understand how we can coexist with stress. Now, if it wasn't as clear, we can take some time to kind of talk about it a bit more, but I didn't want to go into the nerdy sense of mindfulness, because I think we'd get lost. But I think even though there's that technical term of mindfulness, I think we can all understand it boiling down to being present and being aware of our presence in that present moment. And we're taking it to the next level by saying Krishna is the source and Krishna is that target that we're being mindful of, because then it starts to eliminate. And, in the same way that Arjuna is surrendering by the end of the Bhagavad Gita, right? He's calm. His skin is not burning anymore. His arrow's not quivering in his hand. It's not falling from his hands anymore. He is now accepting what his duty is moving forward, and he is understanding that Krishna is the source. So I'm hoping that, using the bucket analogy and using Krishna and Arjuna and all the other Shastric, points that we brought up, that it kind of helps understand that there is stress, it's going to happen, it's inevitable. We can use tools like mindfulness and, more importantly, our Krishna consciousness to really, start to break down stress and start to work on it. And then I guess most importantly is that kind of what I just said towards the end, that work, there's no secret behind it. Like if you were expecting 10 secrets of, coexisting with stress, it's not really going to happen, because to be honest, it depends on us, right? It really depends on us to be able to work through it. Not that you don't have the support systems and that you shouldn't have support systems to help you through it, but it really boils down to that hard work yourself. I'm just looking if I had any points here. No. So going back to this question, maybe we can pull up the poll again. And of course, changing the size of your bucket. And then the Madhava, if you can add a fourth option, all of the above. I'm not giving it away at all. But yeah, hopefully after all this talk about stress management and stress and all of its wonderful intricacies.
So I basically have to relaunch it.
Okay, then forget it. It's okay. We won't take the time. No problem. I think I can give the answer away, right? It's D, all of the above, right? We're trying to work on stress management from all different levels. We're changing the size of our bucket by focusing on Krishna and surrendering onto that Supreme. And being more mindful and conscious of Krishna, changing the amount of faucets flowing into our bucket, by being able to understand and perceive stress as something as subjective versus objective, and adding more taps to your bucket, adding more of those coping mechanisms that are effective and that they work for you. Not that they work universally for everybody, but they work for you. Whether it's, observing your breathing, whether it's, writing in a journal, all those things, if that's what's going to help you effectively manage your stress, then do it. So it's really all of the above. That's why we're trying to get through it at different angles, because I don't think one angle is really going to help us out. And then, yeah, that's about it, guys. I think hopefully I didn't go too much over time. I do have like a 3-minute exercise that we can do all together, but it's not necessary. And I'm more than happy to shut up and just hear feedback and comments, possibly questions.
Oh, hi, Rukmini. Yeah, it was a really good talk. Sorry, I will have to leave.
No problem.
But some of my key takeaways were being mindful of Krishna even in those stressful situations. So what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita is always remember me, always think of me. And then on the same note, shifting our focus from the stress and the bucket of the stress to Krishna, and really remembering our dharma of following the path of bhakti. So those are kind of my 2 key takeaways, but I really liked the talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ratha. And so nice to have you and see you again. Please send my regards to Nutama Prabhu.
Yes, Hare Krishna, everyone. Bye.
Maybe we can take questions or comments if there are. Thank you, Rukmini. If there are any, or you can share sort of your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just about to say that some of the things that I'm doing in my personal life, like when you were trying to say that which of these channels do you see yourself, I was like, it hits on all different things, right? Like one analogy that was given was that imagine you have a bottle of water and you take a handful full of salt and put it in here. The water will be really salty. But if you have this entire room or whatever filled with water and you put a handful of salt, the taste is not really going to change.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and he was explaining that in terms of Krishna consciousness, and that in a way is like expanding your bucket. But at the same time, it's also like increasing those taps, because the way you practice Krishna consciousness is through sadhana, mantra, meditation, whatever. Right. So yeah, I'm glad at the end I was like, which is do I pick?
Wait, is it A or B, or is it a combination? I love that. Yeah, no, it's, you know, it's funny because you're trying to label and try to make this as concise as possible. And it was the toughest thing coming up with this topic, or like, you know, trying to speak about this topic, because there's so many angles and there's so many ways to kind of manage your own stress, right? And, you know, what makes sense for me it's not going to make sense for you. So it's kind of like, what's the point of talking about it? But it is needed, because I just feel like there's not as many opportunities nowadays to really talk about our stress. Like, we are so happy to talk about our stresses, right? You know, if someone tells you like, oh yeah, I'm not doing anything with your life, and you're like, I'm better off than that guy. Like, I'm at least doing something with my life. I have 10 things going on in my life. And am I doing it great? No, but at least I have 10 things going on in my life, and I'm very excited about it. But we're not talking about the fact that, like, dude, it is hard to manage. Like, it is actually very hard to manage. And we need to figure out ways to figure it out. We need ways to deal with it. Otherwise, we're not gonna be able to coexist with it. It's just gonna be that big elephant in the room that's just gonna take over the whole entire room and not give you any space to live and breathe.
I also wanted to point this, that I've been reading Spiritual Warrior 4 by Bhakti Swami. Fantastic book on this topic. Like, even when you said about like being present, he said if you live in the past, then you're focusing on the events or trauma that you've experienced in the past, but you're letting it affect you today when it's already happened. And if you keep on focusing on the future, then you're focusing on an event and letting an event that hasn't even happened, may not even happen, affect you while you're still present today.
Such a great way to frame it as well. Like, you know, it's a great exercise to really do on your own on a day that you can, but to write down how many, like I've done this where I've jotted down how much I judge other people, or how many times, you know, in this case that you're talking about, present and future, how many times do we sit down and just say, okay, like I'm just going to monitor myself, how much I'm thinking about in the past and the future. And you'll be surprised how much we're not in the present moment. We are acting in the present moment, but we are nowhere near it. We're back at that childhood trauma happened, you know, years ago, that you're still ruminating about and you're still thinking about over and over again about how that affected you. And you're absolutely right. It is affecting our actual behavior now in the present moment. So a lot of it is not subliminal, like, you know, happening under the surface. But again, I feel like as practitioners of bhakti, we are so well equipped. You know, we're given the tools. It's just if we're ready to manipulate and use them, and not just think of them as tiers or ways to measure our advancement, right? If I just use my 16 rounds as a tier of like, yes, I have met like spiritual bhakti level 39. Like, if I just use it as that, I mean, I'm not getting anywhere with it. I'm not using it. I'm not using it as a tool to really effectively change my own behavior and become, you know, good citizens as Srila Prabhupada wanted us to be. I'm just using it as a tool to measure myself. So I think it's something that's kind of underlying for me, that I think that as a movement we really need to move away from, is attaining, you know, certain levels or attaching certain level of prestige to the amount of service or the amounts that we're doing, and actually sitting down and asking each other, are we being conscious of Krishna at all times? Like, I'll give it a silly example, like, you know, hanging out with friends that are devotees. Like, I don't have any friends outside of devotees. Like I work with people and I have great friendships with them, but if I'm really reflecting, I don't like spend time with them on the outside. So my only friendships are devotee friendships, and we hang out. It's great. And under the pretext of, yeah, he's the devotee or she's the devotee, I'm saying, yeah, that's it's Sangha. Yeah, it is association. What are you talking about? It is. But how many times did Krishna come up? Unless we do like, like, hey guys, let's do a kirtan. Yeah, let's do a kirtan for like 5 minutes. Like, can we go back to what we were doing before? Like gossiping about that Mataji because she whack. Like, how many times we use that word of association to kind of like, yeah, associated Krishna. I'm doing association. That's Anjaneya Tirtha. I'm doing association with them all the time. Very much cool. But it's not. It's really not. And we use, again, a lot of these tools as a way to mask ourselves and say like, yeah, I'm being Krishna conscious, but we're not. Or at least I'm not. I'm not being conscious of Krishna when I'm associating with devotees under the pretext of associating with devotees. Sorry, I totally said I was going to shut up. I'm going to shut up now. Any more thoughts, comments? Rukmini, you're off your rocker. God, I wish it was the other Rukmini Mataji speaking today.
I stop. I have posted Rukmini's email in the chat. So if any of you would like to connect with her offline as well, feel free. Stop. As you can tell, she is amazing. She's very practical. She also is very real. So it's not like, she's not like, hey, you have to chant your 16 rounds and that's the only way you can figure out your problems. I think she's very practical in the sense that she makes it what's beneficial for you. So if anyone wants to connect with her offline, I've put her email address there. Maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more reflections and then we'll wrap up. So AT, yep. I see your hand is up.
Yes. Thank you, Rukmini. That was very intriguing and a lot of things to ponder upon. I did like a couple of things, and I'm hoping maybe you can shed some more light on this. You were speaking about freezing and not addressing is also a passive way of leading things, and I just kept thinking about it. It's going in circles. So sometimes I feel genuinely letting it go is like the best. It's like unwanted stress or unwanted things to ponder upon. And also, it's also a way of passively, like, you sounded much better than how I'm trying to explain. So I'm just trying to understand what's the criteria to let go of something, and is passive way of doing something ever good in any kind of situation? Like, I don't know if I'm making sense here, but if you can just add a little more thought, or if you can think of something about especially the passive part of doing something.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, of course, I painted like the fight, flight, or freeze response as something really negative. But like I was saying, like, it is a physiological response and it is super helpful, right? If you had to like think through every single stress that comes into your life and you're consciously doing that, it's not going to work. But if you're consciously deciding to let go of something, I think that's effective, right? If you're just putting it off because I'd just rather not deal with it, I think that's where kind of it might work in that situation, or it might work at that moment, but it could bite you in the butt later on, right? Like, I don't want to sign, like, I have to sign some documents. I don't really want to do it right now. That means I have to read through it. I'll just let it go for now. It'll be helpful in that moment, but later on, is it going to be effective? No, because now you have a deadline pending and now you have to really rush to do it. Story of my life. But if you are consciously deciding to let go of a situation, so for example, I know we've received, Anjaneya and I work on like Ratha Yatra together. He's our co-chair for Ratha Yatra. We work together on that. We do Sunday feast services, festivals, all these things together. So, when we get a nasty email and we decide to let it go, it's because one, it's a stressor. And I'm deciding that by attending to it, it's not going to be effective for either that person or for myself. I'll try to cope up with it in a different way, but I'm consciously deciding to let it go. I think that's very different than wanting to, let a situation fester because you don't want to deal with it. So if you feel in that situation that you are dealing with it and you're not just relying on your innate or your instantaneous reactions, but you're responding, then I think that's the difference. So I don't think it's not a good coping mechanism, or it's not a good thing to let go. Certainly there are many situations where actually we want to fight so badly and we decide, it's probably not worth my time. I think it's much more effective in that way because you are being conscious of it. And you're again, the difference between reacting and responding. If you're responding, then you're putting your thought into it. You're giving the opportunity to kind of suss out, like what's the possible, situations that might evolve from me letting it go or fighting, and thus deciding to fight. To let it go, to freeze at that moment, so to speak.
Beautiful. Thank you. Nice. I like the analogy of the bucket, by the way. I got caught up in drawing the bucket, but I'll think about it later. But yeah, that was useful to meditate on.
Yeah, I mean, like the video that I chose to use, it's great, but towards the end it says that you can't. The reason why I cut it off at that moment was because it starts to talk about, well, you can't really change the size of your bucket. I'm like, dude, Krishna's involved. You can change the size of your bucket. It's totally fine. So that's why I kind of kept it out of there. That was the one part that I didn't really agree with. And again, we're putting it in our spiritual perspective, so it changes. I hope that it wasn't so confusing. I feel like I jumped through a few different topics, and they each deserve their own full hour of speaking. So I hope it wasn't so confusing, and it was the one fear that I had while doing this talk, and the one stressor last night when I was trying to go through all of this. But I hope it makes sense, and especially when it comes to mindfulness and all those techniques, I would love to have a conversation with any one of you if you ever feel the need to. I really feel very passionate about that, and also how it fits into our Krishna consciousness, because it does really gel really well. It's missing Krishna in it, and we can easily add that in.
Sure. Thank you, Rukmini. That was nice, beautiful.
Anyone else? We'll take one last one, otherwise we'll wrap up.
You suck.
I have a question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
Did someone say you suck?
Oh no, he was talking to me.
Oh, okay. I was just like,
okay.
I'm just such a beautiful
say, like, how awesome the talk was, and then I was just about to press like the button, and he was telling me that I suck for not letting him type it out. But, yeah, it wasn't for you, it was for me. But my question is about the poll when it was talking about the changing the size of the bucket. Could you say it in words how you could change the size of a bucket?
So a lot of it, again, the video talks more about, your characteristics, your genes, the way your family is or your parents are. That's what determines the size of your bucket. And I took the liberty to kind of push it a bit further and say that, when we're adding into the equation Krishna, a lot more is possible, right? So whereas the video was trying to say, like, look, you can't change what you're given, we're adding the element of karma. We're adding the ability to kind of move and transcend towards something a lot more supreme than just a bucket and our stressors. So in that way, I feel that, and again, this is just my interpretation of pushing that bucket analogy, because again, adding Krishna to anything kind of starts to change things up. So in what I felt was that when you're adding Krishna into the equation, you're able to open that bucket or make that bucket deeper, right? In that sense that, kind of like Queen Kunti, right? She's saying, give me more calamities, because her focus is not what's coming into her bucket. Her focus is now Krishna. So she's now kind of actually almost stepping outside of the bucket analogy completely, right? She's now talking about the source of the water. And this bucket analogy that this video talks about, it just talks about the bucket, the faucets that are coming in, the taps that are helping you cope. And Queen Kunti is now, by adding Krishna, we're now talking about the source of the water. What's coming in is not even a topic in this in that bucket analogy, but Queen Kunti is transcending all of that and say, look, I'm focusing on the source of the water. I'm focusing on you and what you're bringing in to this bucket. And because of that, the perception or our feeling of what that bucket is starts to expand, right? Because we're able to handle more stressors at the end. Is that helping, or am I just confusing you further?
No, that's really clear.
Okay. But thank you for sharing that, because I felt like the connections are there, but I wasn't being so clear with them. So that helps. So thank you for asking that question.
Awesome.